Morning. My name is Bart Los, and together with Douglas Mead and Sanjeev Mahajan, I'm organizing the series of webinars in the virtual campaign of the IIOA. And we are extremely happy to have Yasuhide Okuyama as our speaker for today. And I hope that everyone attending will enjoy his talk. Welcome to everyone, both the IIOA members and non-IIOA members who have asked to join. They are, of course, most welcome to attend this meeting as well. So again, I just started recording this meeting. We will do so for the presentation of Yasuhide, and the Q&A afterwards will not be recorded. If you did not mute your microphone, please do it now. And in the Q&A afterwards, you can ask questions by raising your hand. So we will not have questions in between because that's a bit complicated in this type of setting. So raise your hands afterwards if you have questions. Again, I would like to express my gratitude to Yasuhide Okuyama for presenting here. He is a professor at the University of Kitakyushu. He got his PhD in 1999 from the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign. And then afterwards, he worked for a couple of years at the State University of New York in Buffalo, and then for another couple of years at West Virginia University. And in 2005, he returned to Japan. And from 2010 onwards, he has been a professor at the University of Kitakyushu at the Graduate School of Social Systems Studies. And we know Yasuhide quite well within the IIOA for various reasons. One of these is that he was, together with Shigemi Kagawa, the chair of the local organizing committee of the International Input-Output Conference in 2013. Then he has guest edited two special issues of Economic Systems Research in 2007 and 2014, both on issues related to his talk of today. He has also edited two books on disaster analysis for Springer, and he has published his own work in economic systems research, but also in Annals of Regional Science, Journal of Regional Science, Journal of Economic Geography, and many other journals. So, given his vast experience in this field, we are extremely happy that Yasuhide will be giving this talk to us, and he will talk for about 30 minutes, and then afterwards we'll have time for discussion. So, Yasuhide, the floor is yours. Please go ahead.
Okay. Thank you very much, Bart. Nice introduction. Good afternoon, or good evening, or good morning, wherever you are. I'm the person who giving you some talk. So I just share the slide. So can you see the slide? Okay.
Yeah, it's okay. Fine.
Okay. We are going to talk about the disasters and how to make models for the impact analysis of disasters. What disasters or natural hazards like these earthquakes, tsunami, floods, severe storms, or volcanic eruptions, and terrorist attacks. This is a man-made hazard. And we are currently under a pandemic of COVID-19 and climate change. These kind of things have kind of consequences to our economy. So how to measure the impact is our interest. So the contents of today's talk is try to extend or update literature review I wrote in 2007 ESR and with Just Santos 2014 ESR special issues after what kind of advances are made. And also, I'm going to talk about some future possibilities from empirical studies of disasters and make final remarks. Okay, So what the disaster bring us is physical damage on capital stock or infrastructure, these things. Then these damages create production opportunity, lost production opportunities or the business interruptions we call losses. Then these losses will create a ripple effect we call higher order effect. So we need a model to estimate higher order effect. We use input-output or CGE or some other models we create or develop, construct to capture some disaster impact. So first, I'm going to discuss about recent advances of models. Firstly, because we are International Input-Output Association, input-output models is the first one to introduce. These are the brief figure what I'm going to talk about. First, as we know, input-output models have limitations such as fixed coefficient, no price changes, no substitution, no supply capacity constraint, a very rigid structure. And if you want to know more about these limitations, these papers discussing these limitations and some advantages. First, I'm going to present adaptive regional input-output models, initially introduced by Hargard in 2008. This is the basically regional input-output model with a series of case-specific ad hoc assumptions, such as a capacity constraint, rationing schemes for some kind of substitution, and adaptation of demand and supply to a regional I/O model. Because this is a ad hoc, adding ad hoc assumptions, some modelers don't like these exogenous ad hoc assumptions, but some researchers like Albert Bertrand, who said these ad hoc assumptions are good actually because each disaster or each natural hazard is a unique. It has to be some case-specific assumption have to be made. Anyway, this adaptive I/O model has been very popular, and also some extensions. This adaptive I/O model with inventory was also published, and with farm network, micro-level farm network extension was made in 2012. Other models try to overcome some limitations of I/O model is a linear programming model. One is Cox and Thiesen's multi-regional impact assessment model, MRIA. This is a recursive dynamic multi-regional supply use model, not I/O, but supply use model, adding the supply constraint and spatial substitution. Because this is an optimization linear programming model, they can allow these flexible features. And another linear programming model was also published recently by Fudgewelly with event matrix and linear programming for supply constraints. Okay. Also, nonlinear programming model was introduced by Osterhaven and Baumeister in 2016. This is the interregional I/O model with nonlinear programming with minimum information gain. What this model can do is introducing the supply shortage, flexible trade coefficient, partial import and export substitution, very, very flexible structure. In terms of this substitution and supply side capacity constraint. Then they claim this model has a simplicity of I/O model with a possibility of CGE approach flexible structure. Because of this advantage of nonlinear programming model, this model has been used several different cases Osterhaven and Tobin extended this model to a multi-regional supply-use table model applied to German flooding. Also, they used this modeling to examine how coefficient flexibility is covering many different features of disaster impact. And also, this modeling framework, Osterhaven and Bormister model, was used recently in ESR paper for the rural area disaster. So this is becoming a very popular model to be used. Another input-out model, extended input-output model used is the mixed model, mixed exogenous endogenous model used based on wild data to apply to 2011 East Japan earthquake. They made transportation equipment sector, which was damaged in Japan, as exogenous, and also some other countries' transportation equipment sector, which has a supply constraint, due a kind of forward effect from this Japanese transportation equipment sector, so that they also made other countries' same sector as exogenous. Then all other things are endogenous, then estimated the impact. So this is another way to overcoming the supply constraint. Hybrid approach was also introduced by Rose and Wei. This used the traditional Leontief type model for backward impact and also applied the modified Gauss type supply-driven IO model for forward impact. So they don't create one model to measure everything, but they separate the model for backward impact and forward impact with different models. Various modified model, because IO model is very simple and very easy to modify. There are various modified models was proposed to measure the disaster impact. One is the imbalance models by Stinch and Okrajova. Sorry for my pronunciation, but they created the closed IO model, adding some event matrix, which is a damage matrix, very similar to the inoperability matrix, to simulate imbalance between supply and demand and under the disaster situation. This modeling framework is also very popular, and Lee et al. Used this framework to then extend it to a dynamic one and adding some feature of adaptive regional input-output model for production capacity and ration schemes. Again, the IO model is a very simple structure, and these many different modeling frameworks can be integrated together. That also one of the examples. We can add many features to one model. Is the generalized dynamic IO model by Avellino and Hewings. This model, GDIO, synthesizes adaptive IO model with inventory and sequential inter-industry model for the time varying production, and Bailey Weeks thermoeconomic model for the demographic changes, and try to estimate intertemporal and adjustment and intratemporal production market processes. Again, IO model is a very simple structure, so we can combine these features together. This is a little bit different way to do a multi-scale model. linking micro-level, farm-level econometric analysis for labor productivity with IIO model, which is a Stinch-Bokarojova modification in it. So plugging this econometric result to IIO model, macroeconomic model, then try to capture the long-term average impact of flooding in China. This is not integrating the model, but how we can use this micro-level data with macro or economic model. This is one of the way to go. There are a few papers comparing different models. One is Averino and De Rivera compared impact evaluation by these models. Why they, well, I should introduce them. The Leontief model and Cochrane rebalancing model, which is used in HAZES. If you don't know the HAZES, HAZES is disaster models, impact models, developed by the FEMA, Federal Emergency Management Agency in US, for use by practitioners and emergency management officials. Then HAZES used to have the Cochrane rebalancing model in it, so that practitioners can calculate economic impact using HAZES, but by some reason they deactivated Cochrane model in HAZES. So these two guys try to find what would be a good substitution. Then compare these models. Some of them are dynamic and some of them are static. But they found that this dynamic interoperability input-output model would be a good substitute because they have a recovery path endogenized and easy to use. Another comparison paper was published in 2019 by Coxero. They compare more complicated model with IO, compare the multi-regional supply use table model, dynamic multi-regional operability input model, input-output models, MLIA, this is a linear programming model, and MR multi-regional non-linear programming, also have Bowmister model, then compare with one case. Because they want to know how supply shocks and substitutions have, if we can integrate these things with the model, how the impact estimation differ. They found, of course, the demand-driven models like MRSU or the MRIIM couldn't take into account the substitution, special substitution, so they only have a negative, but others, this optimization model, linear programming and non-linear programming, can capture the substitution effect, and that is big. Some impact can be become positive in non-damaged areas. Okay, moving to the CG models. CG models are also very popular for disaster impact analysis, but CG model has some disadvantages. One is the data requirement. They need a lot of data. Also, expert required not only for constructing the model, but running the model requires some expert knowledge. In addition, some parameter values, especially the elasticity of substitution, where that comes from is always questioned. So these are the kind of disadvantage. Then some researchers try to overcome these disadvantages. One is expert knowledge required for running the model. So Chen et al. Created the economic consequence analysis tool called ECAT, which is a reduced form CG analysis for rapid estimate of disaster impact. What they did is relatively not simple, but straightforward. Run the full CG model 100 times, then statistically analyze outcomes by OLS and quantile regressions. Then derive linear equations, what impact and how much outcomes come, the 100 times, tweaking some key parameters. Then this linear equation and add Monte Carlo simulation for variabilities, use this equation as a reduced form CGE analysis. Not running CGE model itself, but kind of condensed it to essence of linear equations. For policymakers, they can use this reduced CGE analysis for quick, rapid estimate of economic impact on GDP and employment. And this kind of interface, this is the input area, this is output area. They can just choose some options, then they can estimate the economic impact. So this is try to overcome expert knowledge required for running the model, the case. This ECAT model is further extended to the generalized regional and dynamic ECAT, or GRAD ECAT, by Dixon et al. And this covers broader feature of spatial and dynamic dimensions and various input, and also output has more options. Next one is CGE models has parameter values disadvantage, and two papers try to estimate elasticity of spatial substitution under disaster. One is Kajitani and Tatano 2018 paper in ESR. By the way, this paper won the Stone Prize in 2018. This is they have a special CG model for Japan, 9 region, and applied to 2011 East Japan earthquake. And they kind of changed the elasticity values to match with the empirical value of industry production index. So if the outcomes matches with this index, that should be the elasticity of substitution in that particular case. So they say they use the monthly simulation using an annual CG model with a restriction of short-term closure rule of labor and capital movement. Okay, another paper doing very similar things, but they estimated the elasticity of spatial substitution and factor substitution between labor and capital. They used the same case study, 2011 East Japan earthquake, and also tweaked these two values and match with same industry production index. But they use the monthly recursive dynamic CG model. So there's slightly different ways to do it. So the value they estimated between two papers are somewhat different. But this is one of the way to see how elasticity changes under disaster situation. I skipped these two. These are variant of CG model, but it's not actually CG model, but using the system dynamics and add to some other feature, like this one is infrastructure, and this one is some environmental models integrated. But due to the time constraint, I skipped this. CG model has also comparison analysis with different models. One is Cox et al. Paper in 2016 compared with two IO-based model, adaptive model and linear programming model, and the CG model, which is a downscale GTAP model. And they compare the result with two Italian flooding scenario. As you might expect, the estimate between this adaptive I/O model and optimization models of these linear programming and CG model are quite different, 3 to 6 times difference. I/O model has a higher estimate. And they said even nonlinear programming model is based on I/O model. It's the result outcomes are not so much difference with CGE counterpart. Next one is also the comparison paper among many simulation cases recently published in ESR. This is a meta-analysis of 253 CG simulations in 57 empirical studies. Then they statistically analyze using OLS, then what factor is making difference. They did, the result indicate many these disaster type create a larger difference or sensitive to assumptions or closure rules, or the resilience is effective. But I'm a little bit, I'm having a little bit of reservation of this because these results are not random variables. Using a statistical model like OLS to calculate is somewhat, maybe I'm not sure about how meta-analysis should be done, but this one is one way to see how we can compare the modeling result. The last one I'm going to discuss is agent-based model. Because you can see here, adaptive I/O-based ABM, agent-based model, recently introduced. So I included agent-based models here. 2 studies using this adaptive regional I/O-based agent-based model. One is done by Japanese researchers applied to a 2011 East Japan earthquake. What they did is extend adaptive regional I/O model with farm network we discussed before to farm network part is becoming agent-based model for farms and consumers and simulating nationwide supply chain in Japan. Then the result is kind of reproduced well the macroeconomic trajectory after the event. So micro level agent-based model connected to macro level adaptive regional I/O model. This is one example we might want to follow. Another one, actually, they use a similar framework, extending adaptive model with farm network to IBM, but they add a transportation network. They apply to Tanzanian road network to see which road or the link or node is vulnerable to flooding. So they also use the agent-based model for farm networks, then connected to macro or adaptive regional I/O model. Anyway, interestingly, these 2 models, this is the first one, Nature Sustainability 2019. This is the 2021 Nature Sustainability. It seems Nature Sustainability likes adaptive regional I/O with ABM. So if you want to publish in Nature, then you might want to use this type of modeling. I don't know. Anyway, this agent-based model, this is not I/O-based, but why I add this is published in European Journal of Operations Research. They use the supply chain network structure, farm level, but this is more topological network. It's not actually distance or anything, but how topologically network is built, then simulate the propagation behavior. They are also interested in forward propagation and backward propagations. They solve this as a one of the operations research problem. So very interesting to see different communities also interested in this supply chain, or more recently the value chain networks. Anyway, so I just discussed the two groups of modelings, and as we see, IIO model has expanding to influence other modeling framework. The adaptive regional IO was used with agent-based model, and this linear programming and nonlinear programming are kind of reaching toward CGE estimated outcomes. So our reach is further going or expanding. Anyway, the final part is the future opportunities from empirical studies. I'm going to discuss 3 of them, but more specifically, micro-level data and farm survival studies. Because as we see, the micro-level studies important to see how farms survive or not survive due to a disaster can be used for those micro model with macro model, like adaptive regional IO model with agent-based simulation model for the farm level. So this farm level survival analysis for these cases, also the plant level survival analysis, this is more location specific and more recent disasters. Also, household level welfare analysis was done for the recent Thailand flood case. So this kind of micro level studies have been published because of data availability or any other reasons, or the interest on this disaster impact analysis. So if you would like to connect this micro level modeling with a macro level, so that we might improve our estimation result, more detailed structures, so that we might want to see this or analyze these studies. Short-term impact analysis and of these spatial propagation and analysis of price change and structure change of the regional economy have been done with recent disasters, and also long-term impact studies for the economic growth, effect on investment, also effect on demography, effect on labor market and wages after disaster. This why I put these things on here is discussed in the final remarks. Okay, one more slide to go. Final remarks. What I want to see, or what is a future opportunity for disaster impact analysis is, as we discussed, several papers doing comparative analysis among models. This comparative analysis may be very useful for the users and for researchers too, what kind of models are developed and how they are different in terms of outcomes or the assumptions or the aspect they focus. Then, as I said in before, we can, if the model is IO-based, we can combine different models together to try to overcome some limitations. So comparative analysis is one of the things I want to see in the future. The next one is a validation of estimated impact with empirical studies. What we do is try to estimate impact of this actual disaster or hypothetical one but we rarely go back to validate what we estimated is accurate or not. Because as I showed you in last few slides, there are empirical studies done recently, so we can compare our estimate and empirical result, empirical studies numbers, so that how accurate or not accurate we can validate our models, or then we can improve if necessary. Third one, what we can do for the future studies is incorporation of uncertainty. Scott Kelly of Oxford said, but because what we have estimated was mostly deterministic estimate, not stochastic one. But if the models to be used, or what practitioners want is more like range of impact, upper bound, lower bound, the probability of those range. So how we can incorporate those kind of uncertainty in the model is one of the way we have to go. The last one is a more like a long-term effect issue. What we estimate is the disaster impact of disaster strikes. That's the short-term impact. But actually, disaster risks create a longer term. Disaster risks create investment for countermeasures that may lead to a positive economic impact, or might be negative. We are not sure, but these two things together is a full picture of disaster impact. Was discussed in this paper. So these four future opportunities we can go, or I want to see in the future for this disaster impact analysis model. That's all for my talk. Thank you very much for your attention.
Okay, Yasuhide, thank you very much for your extensive coverage of the literature. So as I announced beforehand already, we will now stop the recording.